the story of Siddhartha Gautama becoming the Buddha, won the auspicious descent many years ago in a small kingdom in northern India. An event occurred that changed the entire world. Queen Maya, the virtuous wife of King Suddhodana, had a divine dream while sleeping. In her dream, the queen saw a radiant beam of light descending from the heavens towards her. Within this light was the image of a magnificent elephant. The elephant was pure white and had 6 tusks. This luminous elephant flew closer to the queen and eventually merged into her body. Queen Maya woke up with an immense joy that she had never felt before. She immediately informed King Suddhodana about her dream, and they both sought the wisdom of the knowledgeable court ministers to interpret its meaning. The ministers responded, "Your Majesty, it is a very auspicious dream. It signifies that the queen will soon give birth to a child, and this prince will become a superhuman being. Not only will your Majesties be blessed, but the entire human race will benefit from the birth of such an extraordinary prince." Hearing this auspicious news, the king and queen were overjoyed. The king was particularly happy because he desired a son who would one day succeed him and rule the kingdom. Now, it seemed his wish might come true. According to ancient customs, a woman would return to her parental home to give birth to her first child. Therefore, as the time of delivery approached, Queen Maya, accompanied by her friends and attendants, left King Suddhodana's palace to return to her parental home. The entourage had not traveled far when the queen asked to stop and rest, sensing that the baby was about to be born. When they reached the beautiful garden of Lumbini, the queen entered the garden to find a suitable place for the delivery. It is said that even the animals and plants wanted to assist, knowing that the child to be born was a superhuman. A branch of a large tree bent down, and the queen grasped it with her right hand. Supporting herself in this position, the queen gave birth to the prince. The attendants held the newborn and marveled at his noble and dignified appearance. At that moment, the entire country experienced peace and happiness. People forgot their worries, ceased quarreling, and expressed immense love and friendship towards one another. Some saw a rainbow appear in the sky, along with other auspicious signs and unusual events. The sages throughout the kingdom observed these signs of peace and prosperity, and they joyfully said to each other, "Indeed, a great blessing has occurred." Pay attention to these auspicious signs. Today is the full moon day of April. Surely, this is a significant day. Queen Maya did not expect that her joy of giving birth to a prince would be shared by the entire nation. She carried the newborn prince back to the capital with great happiness, where the king awaited her return. To the visit of the virtuous sage, with great joy, King Suddhodana congratulated Queen Maya and the newly born prince. The people celebrated with grand festivities, and the entire kingdom was adorned with flags and flowers. It was a time of immense happiness and peace for the country. Because everyone everywhere rejoiced, the king and queen named the prince Siddhartha, meaning one who brings all good things. At that time, the wise men made predictions about the prince. They said, "Your Majesty, the omens seen on the day of the prince's birth are very auspicious. The prince will grow to be an even greater person than your Majesty." Hearing this, the king was very proud. He thought, "If these wise men are right, my son, Prince Siddhartha, could become a great ruler, not only of our small kingdom, but of the entire world. What an immense honor for me and the royal family." In the first few days after the prince's birth, many people came to the palace to see the newborn prince. One of these visitors was the sage SIDDHARTHA. He was a hermit living in the deep forest, renowned for his saintliness. The king and queen were surprised to see the sage SIDDHARTHA leaving his forest dwelling to visit the palace and respectfully said, "Venerable sage, we are honored by your visit. Please tell us the purpose of your visit, and we will be delighted to serve you in any way you need." Sage SIDDHARTHA replied, "Thank you for your kind welcome, your Majesties. I have come from afar to visit you because I have seen some extraordinary omens. These signs indicate to me that the prince whom the queen has just given birth to will achieve great spiritual knowledge in the future. I have spent my entire life in pursuit of such wisdom, so I am eager to meet the prince personally." The king happily hurried to where the prince was sleeping. Carefully carrying the prince, the king brought him to sage SIDDHARTHA. The sage looked at the prince for a long time without saying a word. Finally, he stepped back, looked up at the sky, sighed deeply, and began to cry. Seeing Sage Siddhartha cry, the king and queen became worried. They feared that the sage had seen something unfavorable in the prince. With tears in his eyes, King Suddhodana knelt down and cried out, "Venerable sage, what have you seen in the prince that makes you cry? All other wise men have said that my son will become a great person with extraordinary wisdom. But now, after looking at the prince, you are crying. Does this mean the prince will die young? Or is there something terrible that will happen to him? He is my only beloved son. Please tell me what you have seen in the prince, as my heart is filled with worry and sorrow." With a compassionate look, Sage Siddhartha reassured the king and queen, telling them there was no need to fear. The sage said, "Your Majesties, please do not be troubled. I am not crying because I have seen something bad in the prince. In fact, what I have seen and know for sure is that the prince will grow to be a superhuman being. I have seen many special marks on him, such as the light radiating from his fingers, indicating that his future will be very glorious. If the prince decides to stay with your Majesty and become a king, he will be a Chakravarti, a universal monarch, bringing great peace and happiness to the people. But if he does not wish to ascend the throne, his future will be even greater. He will become a great spiritual teacher, showing all of humanity the way to achieve inner peace and love. Seeing the world full of suffering, he will leave the palace to seek the path to end suffering. He will teach this path to anyone who wishes to learn. No, your Majesties, I am not crying for the prince. I am crying for myself. You see, I have spent my whole life searching for the truth and the way to end suffering. Today I have met the prince, who will one day teach what I have longed to learn. But by the time the prince is ready to teach, I will have passed away, so I will not have the chance to study with him in this lifetime. That is why I am so sad. But your Majesties are truly blessed. Do not worry, but rejoice in having given birth to such an extraordinary prince." Sage Siddhartha looked at the prince one last time for a long while, then slowly left the palace. The king watched the sage leave, then turned his eyes back to the prince. He was very relieved to know that there was no danger threatening the prince's life. Then the king thought, Sage Siddhartha said that Prince Siddhartha will either become a great king or a great spiritual teacher. It is best if he first becomes a king. What a pride it will be to have such a famous and powerful prince. Then when he is old like Sage Siddhartha, he can renounce the throne and become a virtuous teacher if he wishes. Thinking this, King Suddhodana stood happily, holding the prince in his arms, dreaming of the glory his son would one day achieve. The virtuous prince. While the prince was still very young, his mother, Queen Maya, passed away. Shortly before her death, she spoke to her younger sister, "My time to care for my newborn son is coming to an end. Dear sister, after I am gone, please take care of Prince Siddhartha for me." Her sister promised to do so and raised the prince with great love and care as if he were her own son. The prince grew up to be a smart, kind, and compassionate child. His father, King Suddhodana, invited the most distinguished teachers in the land to educate him, and the prince quickly demonstrated his exceptional intelligence. After just a few days of instruction, the teachers reported to the king, "Your Majesty, the prince no longer needs our teachings. After only a few lessons, he has mastered everything we had to teach. In fact, he has taught us things we did not know before." Hearing this, the king's pride in the prince grew even greater. He thought, "With such intelligence, my son will surely grow up to be a wise and powerful king," and this made him very happy. But the prince's special qualities extended beyond his intelligence. He was inherently kind, gentle, and compassionate. While other children his age enjoyed playing vigorous games and pretending to be soldiers, fighting each other, Prince Siddhartha preferred a quiet life. He loved the small animals living in the palace gardens and made friends with them. The animals sensed that the prince would never harm them, so they did not fear him. Even the wild animals that usually fled at the sight of people would come to greet him when he entered the garden. They approached without fear and accepted food from his hands, which he always carried for them. One day, while sitting in the garden, the prince saw a flock of swans flying in the sky. Suddenly, an arrow shot up and struck one of the swans, causing it to fall to the ground near the prince with the arrow still embedded in its wing. Prince Siddhartha gently picked up the injured swan and spoke softly to it. "Oh, my poor swan, do not be afraid. I will take care of you. Let me remove this arrow." He gently stroked the bird with one hand to calm it, and with the other, he slowly removed the cruel arrow. The prince applied special medicine to the swan's wing and continued to speak soothingly, wrapping it in his silk robe to keep it warm. A little while later, another young boy, Devadatta, the prince's cousin, came running into the garden. He was carrying a bow and arrow and shouted excitedly, "Siddhartha, Siddhartha, great news! I shot a swan! Look at my skill! I hit it with my first shot! It must have fallen somewhere around here. Help me find it." Devadatta saw his blood-stained arrow on the ground near the prince's feet and noticed the prince holding something. Recognizing it as the swan he had shot, he exclaimed, "Hey, you're holding my swan. Give it to me. I shot it, so it belongs to me." Devadatta tried to take the bird, but the prince held on tightly, refusing to let his angry cousin touch it. With determination in his voice, Prince Siddhartha said, "I found the injured, bleeding bird here, and I will not give it to anyone until it is healed." Devadatta argued, "But the swan is mine. I shot it, and you have stolen it from me. Give it back, or I will take it by force." The two princes stood arguing for a while, Devadatta growing increasingly angry, but Siddhartha steadfastly refused to give up the swan. Finally, the prince suggested, "When two people have a dispute like this, we should resolve it in court. In front of wise ministers, each of us will present our case, and they will decide who is right. I think we should do that." Devadatta did not like the idea much, but since it was the only way to get the swan back, he agreed. Both went to the palace to present their case before the king and his ministers. At court, everyone smiled at the request of the two princes. The ministers thought, "They are using our time to settle a dispute over a single bird." But the king said, "Siddhartha and Devadatta are royal princes, and I am pleased to see them bring their disputes to us for resolution. This is important because they will need the court's decisions when they become future rulers. Let the trial begin." Each prince took turns explaining what had happened. The ministers tried to determine who had the rightful claim to the swan. Some said, "Devadatta shot the bird, so it belongs to him." Others argued, "Siddhartha found the swan, so it is his." The ministers deliberated and debated for a long time. Finally, an old man, whom no one remembered seeing before, appeared in the court. He looked very virtuous, and the ministers explained the situation to him. After hearing the story, the old man declared, "Every living being values its life above all else. Therefore, I believe the swan belongs to the one who saved its life, not to the one who tried to take it. Give the swan to Siddhartha." Everyone agreed that the old man's words were wise and true, so the court ruled in favor of Prince Siddhartha. The king wanted to reward the old man for his wise judgment, but he had disappeared. The king thought, "How strange. I do not know where he came from or where he went." No one knew. This was one of the mysterious events that occurred around the prince, leading many to believe that Siddhartha was indeed a remarkable child. For the competition for a husband, as Prince Siddhartha grew older, his gentle nature endeared him to everyone who knew him. However, his father, King Suddhodana, was increasingly worried. The king thought, "Siddhartha is very kind and contemplative. I want him to grow up to be a great king, and a king must be brave and strong. But the prince prefers to sit and meditate in the garden rather than study to become a national leader. I fear he may wish to leave the palace and live the ascetic life like the sage Asita. If he does this, he will never become a great king." These thoughts troubled the king greatly. He summoned his most trusted ministers to seek their advice on what to do. Finally, one of them suggested, "Your Majesty, the prince dreams of other worlds because nothing in this world has yet captured his heart. Let us find him a wife so he may settle down, have children, and develop an interest in the affairs of the state." The king thought this was an excellent idea. He ordered a grand banquet to be held at the palace. Many young and beautiful maidens from noble families were invited. At the end of the feast, the organizers asked the prince to give gifts to each of the maidens, while the ministers observed to see which one the prince favored. The beautiful maidens were all shy when meeting the prince. He stood there, looking handsome but indifferent, beside a table full of expensive gifts. Each maiden timidly approached, bashfully looked down as they neared the prince, received a piece of jewelry, a bracelet, or another gift, and quickly returned to their seats. Finally, only one maiden remained. She was Princess Yasodhara, the daughter of a neighboring king. Unlike the other maidens, she boldly approached the prince. For the first time, the young prince looked directly at the maiden standing before him. She was incredibly beautiful, and the prince was instantly captivated by her. They stood silently for a moment, gazing into each other's eyes. Then Yasodhara spoke. "Your Highness, where is my gift?" The prince was startled, as if waking from a dream. He looked down and saw that the table was empty. All the gifts had been given away. "Here, take this," the prince said, removing the ring from his finger. "This is my gift to you." Yasodhara happily took the ring and slowly returned to her seat. The ministers, witnessing the scene, quickly went to report to the king. They were delighted and said, "Your Majesty, we have found a perfect wife for the prince. She is Princess Yasodhara, the daughter of King Superbuddha of the neighboring kingdom. We will visit him immediately to arrange the marriage." King Suddhodana agreed, and soon after he visited Yasodhara's father, King Superbuddha. King Suddhodana was warmly welcomed, and King Superbuddha said, "I am sure your prince is a fine young man, but I cannot simply give my daughter to anyone. Many other princes wish to marry her, and they are all outstanding young men, skilled in horse riding, archery, and other sports. Therefore, if your son wishes to marry my daughter, he must compete with the other suitors, as is our custom." A grand competition was organized, with Princess Yasodhara as the prize. King Suddhodana was worried. He thought, "My son has never shown any interest in the warrior sports. How can he possibly win this competition?" But the prince, sensing his father's concern, said, "Father, do not worry. I am prepared to do whatever is necessary to win Yasodhara's hand." The first contest was archery. The young men aimed at targets placed at a considerable distance, and each hit the bullseye. When it was Devadatta's turn, for he was also one of the suitors, he not only hit the target, but his arrow pierced through it and landed on the other side. The crowd cheered, but Yasodhara closed her eyes in horror. She thought, "How can my beloved SIDDHARTHA ever shoot an arrow like that? It would be dreadful if I had to marry Devadatta." But SIDDHARTHA was confident. When his turn came, he placed the target so far away that most people could not see it. He took an arrow, fitted it to his bow, and pulled it back. He pulled so hard that the bow broke in half, and he tossed it aside. The prince requested, "Please bring me another bow, but this time, choose one that is stronger and will not break like the last one." An official announced, "Your Highness, there is an ancient bow in the palace. It belonged to one of the greatest warriors of old. But since his death many years ago, no one has been strong enough to use it." The prince said, "I will use it," and everyone was astonished. As he took the bow, he carefully bent it and drew the string with ease. He placed an arrow on the string, pulled it back so far that the ends of the bow almost touched, then aimed and released. Twang! The sound was so loud that people in distant villages heard it. The arrow flew so swiftly that after hitting the bullseye in the center, it continued to fly until it vanished from sight. The crowd erupted in cheers. "The prince has won! The prince has won!" But archery was only the first contest of the day. The next was swordsmanship. Each young man selected a tree and demonstrated their strength by cutting into it with their sword. The first suitor chopped through a 6-inch tree trunk, then a 9-inch one, and finally, with one stroke, he cut through a tree a foot thick. When it was the prince's turn, he chose a tree with 2 trunks growing close together. He swung his sword so swiftly that no one saw it move. The blade was so sharp and clean that even after cutting through, the tree trunks remained standing. Seeing the trees still upright, the crowd and especially Yasodhara exclaimed, "The prince has lost. His sword did not even cut through the first tree." But a gentle breeze passed and the tree trunks fell. The crowd cheered again. "The prince has won the contest." The final contest was horse riding. A wild horse never ridden before was held by strong men while a young suitor tried to mount it. but the horse bucked and kicked so violently that no one could stay on its back for more than a few seconds. Finally, a young man managed to hold on while others led the horse, but it jumped and reared so wildly that the rider was thrown off. The horse would have trampled him if several men had not rushed in to restrain it. The crowd began to shout, "Stop the contest! Don't let the prince near that horse! It's too dangerous! It will kill him!" But Siddhartha was not afraid. He thought, gentleness can conquer the wildest nature, and he slowly approached, taking hold of the horse's mane. Speaking softly and stroking its head and cheeks gently, the prince calmed the horse's rage and fear. The horse instantly became gentle and began licking Siddhartha's hand. Continuing to speak sweetly to it, the prince climbed onto its back. As the crowd cheered, the prince rode the horse gracefully before the kings and ministers, bowing to his sweet prize, his beloved Yasodhara. The competition was over, and young Siddhartha had won. The prince had proven himself not only with great strength and skill, but also with gentleness and compassion. 5. The Palaces of Delight. Soon after, Prince Siddhartha married Princess Yasodhara. King Suddhodana, determined to ensure his son would never want to leave the kingdom, ordered the construction of not one, but 3 magnificent palaces for the newlyweds. The king instructed the chief architect, "Make them as beautiful as possible. I want the palaces to be so splendid that anyone entering them will feel as if they have stepped into paradise. I want one palace for the summer, built of cool marble, surrounded by lakes and clear streams. The second should be a warm and comfortable palace for the winter. The third palace is for the rainy season. These palaces should be set in the middle of a large, beautiful park with stunning views in every direction. Surround the garden with a high wall to prevent any sorrowful sights from the outside world from entering. Everything must be perfect so that Prince Siddhartha will never want to leave the palace." The king spared no effort in making the new palaces incredibly appealing to the prince. He recruited the best musicians in the land to perform day and night. All the attendants were beautiful dancers, and numerous top chefs were instructed to continually prepare and serve the finest delicacies to the prince. The king forbade anything that might cause the prince distress or make him want to leave the palace. For many years, Prince Siddhartha lived in this heavenly realm. From morning till night, he enjoyed countless pleasures. He never witnessed anything unpleasant or heard any harsh or unkind words. For instance, if one of the attendants fell ill, she had to leave the palace and only return once she was fully recovered. In this way, the prince never saw illness or anything that could cause sorrow. The king ordered that no one was to tell the prince any sad or troubling stories. Even in the garden, if a tree began to wither or a flower wilted, the gardeners immediately removed it. Therefore, the prince never saw a dead or dying plant. As a result, he was unaware of the suffering and sorrow in the world. Time passed quickly in this dreamlike state. Yasodhara gave birth to a son, Rahula, and everything seemed perfect. The king was delighted to see his plans to keep the prince engaged in royal life progressing flawlessly. However, this did not mean that Siddhartha, whose birth was destined to bring blessings to humanity, would remain content living such an idle life. Eventually, when the time was right, the prince would discover the true purpose of his life. 6. The Enchanting Song. One evening, after dinner, Prince Siddhartha lay resting on a couch, his head resting on Yasodhara's lap. The musicians were playing soothing melodies, and the maidens were laughing and whispering among themselves. It was an evening like many others that the prince had spent in these palaces of pleasure. But tonight, Siddhartha found himself restless and unable to sleep. Turning to one of his favorite singers, he requested, "Sing me a song to lull me to sleep. Choose a song you have never sung for me before." The singer obediently began a new song, her voice sweet and expressive, as she accompanied herself on the lute. The song painted pictures of the beautiful world outside, of distant lands she had visited as a child, and of splendid cities where people lived happily. The song captivated the prince, and when it ended, he asked her, "Tell me, is it true that there are such beautiful places outside the walls of this garden? How do the people in the capital live? Are there sights in the world more enchanting than what I have seen within these palaces? Tell me everything you know." She replied, "Your Highness, these palaces are indeed the most magnificent, but there are many other beautiful places in the vast world. There are cities, towns, mountains, valleys, and distant lands where people speak different languages. There are many things I have seen and others I have heard about. The palaces and gardens of Your Highness are beautiful, but there is much to see beyond these walls." Hearing this, the prince became eager to see these extraordinary and strange sights for himself. For many years, Siddhartha had contentedly lived within the gardens and pleasure-filled palaces, completely unaware of the world outside. But now, he desired to explore beyond the garden walls and requested his father to arrange a trip outside the palace grounds. The king received the prince's request and thought, "Now my son wants to see the country. Let it be so. The prince has spent quite enough time in these pleasure palaces. It is time for him to see the kingdom he may one day rule." The unexpected sight. King Suddhodana wanted to ensure that his son, during his excursion outside the palace, would not encounter anything that might disturb his mind. He feared that such a sight might prompt Siddhartha to abandon the kingdom in pursuit of an ascetic life. Therefore, before the day of Siddhartha's planned outing, the king sent courtiers and soldiers to announce, "By order of the king, tomorrow Prince Siddhartha will visit the city of Kapilavastu. In honor of the prince, everyone should decorate their homes and streets with bright lights and flowers. The elderly and the sick should stay indoors. Let no unpleasant or unsightly scenes be visible to the prince in the city." With great care, the soldiers gathered beggars from the streets and relocated them to an area of the city that the prince would not visit. The next morning, the prince's attendant, Chana, prepared Siddhartha's beloved horse, Kantaka, and drove the chariot out of the palace gates. This was the first time that the prince, since his early childhood, had seen the city of Kapilavastu, and it was also the first time most of the city's inhabitants had seen their prince. Everyone was overjoyed and lined the newly decorated streets, eager to catch a glimpse of the handsome young prince. As his chariot passed, people admired him, saying, "The prince looks tall and graceful. His eyes and forehead are so bright. We are truly fortunate to have him as our future king." And the prince was equally delighted. The city sparkled and was clean, and Siddhartha saw people everywhere laughing, cheering, and dancing. The streets he traveled were covered in flower petals thrown by the jubilant citizens. Siddhartha thought, "The song described it perfectly. Truly, this is a magnificent and splendid city." However, as the prince and Chana rode through the joyful crowd, they suddenly spotted an old man with a bent back and a sorrowful expression. Curious, as he had never seen anything like it before, the prince turned and asked, "Chana, who is that old man? Why does he walk with a bent back and not dance like the young people? Why is his face wrinkled and not bright like everyone else's, but instead pale and dry? Why is he so different from the others?" Chana pointed to the old man, who was unnoticed by the crowd, and answered, "Your Highness, that is an old man." The prince asked, "Old? Has he always been like this, or did it happen recently?" Chana replied, "No, Your Highness. Many years ago, that old man was young and strong like everyone else you see here today. But his strength gradually declined. His back bent, the color of his cheeks faded, most of his teeth fell out, and now he looks old and frail." Greatly surprised and saddened, Siddhartha asked again, "Is it only this man who must endure the suffering of old age, or does it happen to others as well?" Chana replied, "Your Highness, as you know, surely everyone must go through old age. You, I, Yasodhara, your wife, and Rahula, everyone in the palace, we are all growing older with each passing moment. One day we will all look as old as that man." These words from Chana shocked the prince, leaving him silent for a long time. He appeared stunned, as if struck by a sudden bolt of lightning. Finally, the prince spoke again, saying, "Chana, today I have witnessed something I never wished to see. Amidst the happy young people, the sight of old age has horrified me. Turn the chariot around. All my joy in this excursion is gone. Return to the palace. I do not want to see anything more." Chana obeyed the prince's command. Upon returning to the palace, Siddhartha entered without greeting anyone, hurried upstairs to his private quarters, and sat in silence for a long time. Everyone was puzzled by the prince's unusual behavior and tried to cheer him up, but to no avail. At dinner, the prince showed no interest in the special dishes prepared for him by the royal chef. He also lost interest in music and dance, preferring instead to sit alone, contemplating the concept of old age, old age, old age. 8. The second excursion. Upon learning that the prince was not pleased and was puzzled by his plan possibly going awry, King Suddhodana pondered, "The prince needs to see more sights. I will arrange another excursion for him, but this time he should be shown even more beautiful scenery within the city." So Channa prepared the horse Kanthaka again, and both of them rode the chariot out of the gates of Kapilavastu. The streets were adorned as before, and the citizens were delighted to see their prince once again. But on this occasion, only Prince Siddhartha and Channa saw a sick person amidst the cheerful crowd. The prince exclaimed, "Channa, look over there. Who is that person coughing so violently, with his entire body trembling and groaning in pain?" "Your Highness, that is a person who is ill." The prince asked, "Why is he ill?" "Your Highness, people fall ill for various reasons. They might have eaten something bad, or they might have caught a cold due to the weather. At such times their bodies lose balance, and they might develop a fever." "Can even the happy people in this crowd fall ill?" Channa replied. "Yes, Your Highness. People who are healthy today can fall ill tomorrow. No one can escape illness." For the second time, the prince was profoundly shocked. He said, "I cannot comprehend how a person who is carefree and happy can fall ill at any moment. Turn the chariot back. I have seen enough for today." Upon returning to the palace, the prince felt no happier than the previous time. No one could make him laugh, and he did not want to talk to anyone. The king, realizing his son's unhappiness, was deeply worried and perplexed. "I have tried everything to make my son happy, but his heart is still filled with sorrow. I should consult with the courtiers to see if they have any suggestions to make the prince more cheerful and optimistic." They advised that the next time the prince wanted to go out, he should not go alone. It would be better if musicians, dancers, and courtiers accompanied him. They suggested organizing a visit to a specially decorated garden where the prince could be entertained and enchanted by various delights. So when Prince Siddhartha once again expressed his desire to go on an excursion, all arrangements were made to ensure his journey would be as enjoyable as possible. The city was decorated even more beautifully than before. The sorrowful scenes were concealed, and a special garden was prepared with vibrant and cheerful colors. 9. The final astonishing sight. Prince Siddhartha and Channa left the palace again in their chariot. Accompanying them were courtiers, musicians, and numerous attendants, forming a grand procession. As before, the citizens lined the streets, eagerly watching the royal parade. However, for the third time, the prince and his charioteer witnessed a sight that no one else seemed to notice. A group of mournful people were carrying a long wooden box containing a shrouded corpse, slowly making their way down a street. "Channa, why is that person lying still in the box? Is he sleeping? Why are the others crying? Where are they taking him?" asked the prince. "Your Highness, that is a dead person. They are taking him to the riverbank to be cremated," replied Channa. The prince, bewildered, asked, "What do you mean by dead? Will he feel pain when his body is burned? Channa, explain this to me." Channa then revealed the truth that the king had kept from the prince for many years. "Your Highness, this person once lived just as you and I do now. He was born, grew up as a child, and became a young man. He enjoyed many pleasures and endured many sufferings in life. He had a family, worked to earn a living, and grew old. Then his body weakened and he was bedridden. Eventually he could no longer recognize even his closest friends. His health deteriorated further until he could no longer breathe. With his last breath, the energy of life and awareness left his body. Now he is dead. All that remains is his lifeless body, which he cared for so much during his lifetime. It lies there cold and senseless. When his family cremates his body, he will feel nothing because he is dead." "Channa, tell me, is it rare for people to die like this?" the prince inquired. "Your Highness, not at all. Some people never grow old and rarely get sick. However, everyone without exception will die someday," Channa replied. Channa's candid explanation left the prince profoundly shocked. He asked passionately, "Do you mean to say that one day, my wife, my son, my friends, and I will all die? And these people I see here today, dressed so beautifully, will also meet the same fate. Alas, how can people in this world be so cheerful, singing and dancing, knowing that death awaits them? Why are they so preoccupied with dressing elegantly, knowing that one day, in death, their bodies will be wrapped in a simple white shroud? Is it because people have short memories and forget about death? Or is it that their will is so strong that they do not worry about death? Channa, turn the chariot around. I want to return to the palace and reflect. Despite the prince's distress, Channa drove the chariot to a beautiful garden where the most enchanting singers and dancers awaited, along with musicians, courtiers, and a grand feast prepared by the royal chefs. Everyone warmly welcomed the prince as he stepped out of the chariot. However, the prince did not smile, nor did he utter a word. He was entirely consumed by the thoughts of the scenes he had witnessed that day. 10 fleeting pleasures, everyone tried their best to bring joy to the prince. The dancing girls flirted, hoping to elicit a smile from the handsome, sorrowful face of the prince. But Siddhartha paid little attention to them. He couldn't dispel from his mind the scenes of aging, sickness, and death. One of the courtiers, noticing the prince's lack of interest in the lavish celebrations held for him, approached Siddhartha. With a friendly, teasing tone, he said, "Siddhartha, it's unreasonable for you to ignore these lovely, beautiful dancers and refuse to join the festivities. Come on. You are young and full of energy. You should enjoy yourself. Why are you like this? Aren't these young ladies beautiful enough for you?" But the prince replied in a voice both firm and gentle like rolling thunder. "You misunderstand me. It's not that I don't enjoy looking at these beautiful people and scenes here. However, when I think of how quickly beauty fades and the inevitable change of all things, I find no joy. If there were no aging, sickness, and death, then I too would find great pleasure in these lovely sights. But amid suffering, knowing that this fate awaits us all in the future, how can I be satisfied with fleeting pleasures? My friend, if you have a heart of stone, you may easily enjoy these pleasures. But for me, everything I see is burning in the flames of suffering. Until I find a way to end this suffering, no worldly pleasure can allure me." Unable to cheer up the prince, everyone sadly returned to the palace. When the courtiers reported to the king that nothing could make the prince happy or interested, the king became extremely worried and lost sleep. He thought, "My beloved son, what can keep you here with me in this kingdom? What other pleasure can I provide so that you won't leave?" With these anxious thoughts and the fear of losing his only son, the king spent a night in despair. 11. A session of peaceful meditation. The prince sank deeper into a state of pessimism and despondency. It seemed he no longer found joy in anything. He ate sparingly, resulting in a pale and emaciated appearance. The king and everyone around him were deeply troubled by the unfortunate changes in their beloved Siddhartha. One day the prince approached his father and said, "Father, lately my mind has been in turmoil. I feel restless and seek your permission to go on another excursion outside the palace. A change of scenery might bring me some peace." The king immediately granted the prince's request, eager to do anything that might bring happiness and comfort to his son. As before, the king instructed his most trusted ministers to stay close and watch over the prince. This time, Siddhartha himself rode the horse Kantaka out of the city to explore the beautiful countryside. Eventually, he arrived at a field and dismounted. The courtiers followed close behind. They tried to amuse the prince with tales of court gossip and rumors, but Siddhartha had no interest in trivial stories, so the courtiers left him alone and went off to talk amongst themselves. The prince stood gazing at the field. A farmer was plowing with his oxen. Birds were singing under the bright sunlight. The prince thought, "This place is truly beautiful. The furrows in the field look like waves on a lake." He sat down, and for the first time, his mind felt at ease for a moment. But as he looked closer at the scene before him, he began to notice things he had never seen before. The plow cutting the earth exposed and killed hundreds of tiny insects. He saw countless other creatures scrambling in confusion as their homes were destroyed. The prince also realized that the birds were no longer singing happily. They were constantly searching for food, diving to peck at the terrified insects. and the smaller birds were worried about the hawks and larger birds circling above, hungry and waiting to swoop down. He watched the oxen laboring hard to pull the heavy plow across the field. The farmer whipped them, causing painful welts on their backs. And the farmer himself worked tirelessly. Like the animals, his sunburned and hardened body was drenched in sweat. The prince thought, "This is the cycle of suffering. The farmer, his animals, the birds, the insects, they all work hard all day seeking a happy life, comfort, and food. But in reality, they are constantly killing, destroying, and harming one another. I feel so sorry for the suffering in this world." His heart overflowed with compassion for these unfortunate beings. He didn't want to witness their suffering any longer. He found a shaded spot under a rose apple tree and began to meditate, contemplating all the scenes he had witnessed. As he delved deeper into the nature of the suffering he had seen, his mind grew increasingly calm and still. He felt a peace and tranquility he had never known before. With a clear mind, the prince began to reflect. All beings seek happiness, but most are blinded by ignorance and desire, seeing nothing but suffering in life. Worry, sorrow, poverty, aging, sickness, and death. These are the rewards people receive in their worldly lives. Now that I understand this, I no longer wish to live in this small, ever-changing world of sensory pleasures. I must seek the truth that will bring me everlasting joy and peace. But how can I be content with seeking liberation from suffering just for myself? I must find a way to save all other beings. They are dear to me, and they are suffering so much. I must find the path to end this suffering and share that liberation with others. As this session of compassionate meditation concluded, the prince opened his eyes. Before him stood a sage dressed like a poor mendicant, unlike anyone the prince had seen before. The sage's eyes were kind and clear, his face radiating peacefulness. The prince asked, "Who are you?" The sage replied, "I am one who is repelled by the sufferings of the world. I am weary of the pleasures of the senses that others seek. Thus I wander alone. I have left my home. Now I live and sleep in caves, in the forest, or wherever I find myself. My only joy is in seeking the ultimate peace and liberation." As soon as he finished speaking, the sage miraculously vanished, leaving the prince astonished and filled with joy. The prince thought, "At last, I have found the true meaning of life. I too will leave my palace and begin my quest for true happiness and the path to end all suffering." With resolute determination and a strong will, the prince mounted Kantaka and returned to the palace. 12 King Suddhodana's worries. Upon returning to the palace, the prince went straight to his father's chamber. With hands clasped in the traditional gesture of a serious request, he said, "I wish to become a wandering ascetic to seek the path that ends all suffering. Please, Father, grant me permission to leave the palace." Since the prince was a child, the king had feared he would one day hear this dreadful request. So when the prince spoke these words, the king was filled with horror. With a choked voice and tears in his eyes, he replied, "My beloved son, do not think of leaving the palace. You are still too young to pursue the life of a homeless sage. Wait until you are older. For now, you should stay in Kapilavastu and rule this kingdom." "Father, I will only remain here if you can promise me 4 things. Ensure that I will never grow old, that I will never fall ill, that I will never die, and that I will never suffer. If you cannot grant me these, then I must leave the palace immediately." King Suddhodana was taken aback by these strange requests and began to grow angry. He shouted, "Siddhartha, forget these foolish ideas." But the prince remained resolute. "Father, if you cannot save me from the suffering of old age, sickness, death, and distress, then you must let me go to seek a way to save myself. It is unreasonable for you to keep me here as a prisoner." However, the king refused to listen further, and in a fit of rage, issued a command to his ministers, "Do not let the prince leave the city. Deploy soldiers to surround the palace." 13. The Great Renunciation. Prince Siddhartha left his father's palace and returned to his own quarters. As he walked through the beautifully decorated rooms, the glittering corridors, and past the sparkling fountains, he entered his chamber on the upper floor. He walked past the renowned musicians and the beautiful maidens, but none of these splendid sights caught the prince's attention. His mind was fixed on one thought: he must leave the palace. That night, after dinner, it seemed as if a magical spell had fallen over the palace. One by one, the musicians, dancers, and maidens all felt a profound weariness and fell into a deep sleep. Eventually, even Princess Yasodhara dozed off beside their infant son, Rahula. The prince looked at his wife and child sleeping and thought, "I should hold my son in my arms one last time before I leave, but doing so might awaken Yasodhara. That would make my departure difficult. No, I must leave quickly and quietly before anyone wakes up." Walking softly among the sleeping figures, Siddhartha reached the window, climbed over the roof, and descended to the ground. He approached Channa, the charioteer, who was asleep, and gently awakened him, saying, "Quickly, Channa, saddle my horse. I must leave tonight." Channa was surprised that the prince wanted to leave in the middle of the night, but he did as requested. Channa prepared the horse, Kanthaka, and brought it to the prince. Siddhartha patted the horse gently and whispered, "Kanthaka, my dear friend, we must remain silent. I do not want to wake the guards. Tonight is a very important night." The prince, Channa, and Kanthaka quietly approached the sturdy city gates near the parks, and the gates miraculously opened by themselves. They silently exited the city into the night. As they reached the edge of the city, the prince looked back and vowed, "Until I find the path to end all suffering, I shall not return to the glorious city of Kapilavastu." They traveled all night. As the sun began to rise, they reached a peaceful forest where many ascetics were living in seclusion. The prince felt a sense of joy and thought, "Now my true journey of seeking the path begins." Then he turned to Channa and said, "Dear Channa, thank you for your help. I have reached the place I desired. Now I need you to take my horse and return to the palace." Channa could not believe that the prince would not return with him to the palace. He stood there, eyes brimming with tears. Understanding Channa's sorrow, the prince gently spoke to him again. "My loyal Channa, do not cry. Sooner or later we must part ways. Here, take these ornaments I am wearing. I will not need them anymore. Return to the palace and tell my father that I did not leave in anger. It is not that I no longer love my family. It is because I love them deeply that I must leave them now. If I find the path to end all suffering, I will return. If I do not succeed, my departure would have been inevitable one day, for death will eventually come to separate us all. Now go, and let me begin my quest." Realizing that he could not change the prince's mind, Channa took the reins of Kanthaka from the prince and slowly led the horse away. Channa and Kanthaka looked back at the prince with tearful eyes several times. Finally, they returned to Kapilavastu, where Channa had the sorrowful duty of informing everyone that Prince Siddhartha had left the palace life forever. 14. The quest begins. Standing alone in the forest, ready to embark on his noble quest for enlightenment, Siddhartha thought to himself, "From now on, I am no longer a prince. Therefore, it is not fitting for me to live and dress like one." The prince took a knife and cut off his long, lustrous hair, a symbol of his royal status. He then approached a poor hunter and said, "My friend, I no longer need these fine silken garments. If I am to live as an ascetic in the forest, I should wear simple cloth like you. Let us exchange clothes." The hunter gladly agreed to the prince's request, exchanging his tattered clothes for Siddhartha's rich and luxurious garments. Now dressed as an ascetic, Prince Siddhartha began his search for a teacher who could show him the way to end all suffering. He traveled through forests, seeking out sages and holy men to learn their teachings. Everywhere he went, people received him with great respect and admiration. Although Siddhartha wore ragged clothes and subsisted on simple food that he begged for, his appearance remained strikingly handsome and dignified. The ascetics in the forest, upon seeing him approach, would say to each other, "Here comes another remarkable individual. His face shines with determination. A person like him, seeking the truth, is sure to attain enlightenment." Siddhartha sought out many teachers to learn from, but he was not satisfied with what they had to offer. He thought, "The teachings of these ascetics are valuable, but they do not lead to ultimate happiness." Finally, he heard about some enlightened teachers living in the kingdom of Magadha, ruled by King Bimbisara, so he decided to travel far south and east to find them. One day, as Siddhartha approached the city of Rajagriha, the capital of Magadha, he passed near the city gates. A minister of King Bimbisara saw him and quickly ran to inform the king. The minister excitedly reported, "Your Majesty, I have just seen an extraordinary ascetic in the city. He wears tattered clothes and begs for food from house to house, but I am certain that he is a great man. His face radiates compassion, his demeanor is exceptionally dignified, and it seems as if he emits a special light." The king was delighted and invited Siddhartha to meet him. They conversed for a while, and the king was deeply impressed by Siddhartha's wisdom, humility. Then the king said, "I have never met anyone in whom I could place more trust than you, O ascetic. Please stay in Rajagriha and help me govern this kingdom." But Siddhartha courteously replied, "Your Majesty, I once had the opportunity to govern a kingdom, but I declined. I am not interested in wealth and power. I only wish to seek the truth. I appreciate your generous offer, but I have come to this land to find wise teachers who can help me discover the truth." The king bowed to the ascetic in ragged clothes and said, "I wish you good fortune on your quest. If you attain the truth you are seeking, please return to teach it to me. Even if you do not succeed, you will always be welcome in my capital." Siddhartha thanked the king warmly and continued his journey. 6 years of ascetic practice. Samanera Siddhartha then arrived in the forest where learned ascetics were practicing. Initially, he studied under Alara Kalama and then Udaka Ramaputta. In a short time, he comprehended all that these masters taught. However, he remained unsatisfied and thought to himself, "Although my teachers are holy men, their teachings do not lead to the cessation of all suffering. Therefore, I must strive to discover the truth on my own." The ascetic continued his journey until he reached the Nairanjana River near the sacred city of Gaya. He crossed the river and entered the forest on the other side, where he encountered a group of 5 ascetics practicing severe austerities. Their lives were exceedingly simple. They consumed very little food, lived outdoors, and spent many hours each day in silent meditation. Siddhartha asked these ascetics, "Why do you inflict such pain upon your bodies?" They replied, "Most people in the world indulge and pamper their bodies, thus continuing to suffer. We believe that if we can endure pain, we can find a way to overcome suffering." Siddhartha thought, "For many years, I lived in palaces filled with sensual pleasures. I pampered my body and my mind found no peace. Perhaps these ascetics are right. I will join them in their practices to see if this method leads to the end of suffering." He began practicing the rigorous ascetic methods they followed. Siddhartha sat for long hours in one spot, despite the severe pain in his legs and back, remaining immobile. He subjected his body to the burning heat of the summer sun and the freezing cold of winter winds. He ate just enough to sustain his life. No matter how difficult it was, he kept reminding himself, "I must continue to find the path to end all suffering." The 5 ascetic companions were amazed at Siddhartha's determination. They said to each other, "We have never seen anyone as resolute in his practice as this man. He is always diligent and never loses heart. Siddhartha will succeed in this ascetic path. We should sit near him so that when he finds the true path, we can learn from him." Siddhartha increasingly subjected his body to harsher conditions. Initially, he slept only a few hours each night. Eventually, he stopped sleeping altogether. He reduced his food intake to just a few grains of rice and some wild fruits blown into his robe by the wind. Siddhartha became extremely emaciated. His body lost its radiant beauty, becoming covered in dust and filth. He looked like a living skeleton. Yet he did not abandon his ascetic practices. 6 years passed. Siddhartha was 29 when he left the palace, renouncing all worldly pleasures. Now he was 35, having spent 6 years in harsh asceticism. One day he reflected, "Am I any closer to the goal of liberation than I was 6 years ago? Or am I still as deluded as before? As a prince living in luxury, I indulged in every pleasure a royal could desire. I wasted many years in those prisons of pleasure. Then I renounced the world and began my quest for liberation. I have lived in forests and caves, yet I have gained nothing from starving and torturing my body. I have not found the path to end all suffering. Now I realize that self-mortification is as mistaken as self-indulgence in the royal palaces. To discover the truth, I must follow the middle path, which lies between extreme sensual indulgence and severe asceticism." Siddhartha recalled that many years ago, after seeing a dead man, he had meditated under the jambu tree. He thought, during that meditation, my mind became very calm. For the first time I saw things clearly. Now I will try to meditate again in this way. However, when he looked at himself, he realized, I have been fasting here for many years. My body is tired, filthy, and weak. I am so emaciated that I am just skin and bones. How can I meditate clearly and observe things accurately when my body is dirty and starving? The ascetic slowly stood up and went down to the river to bathe, but he was so weak that he nearly collapsed into the water. With great effort, he managed to pull himself up onto the bank and sat down to rest for a while. 16. The devout woman's offering. Near the small village next to the forest, there was a cowherd living with his wife, Sujata. She was overjoyed to have recently given birth to their first son. She used the finest milk from their cows to prepare a sumptuous meal. She planned to take the food into the forest to offer it to the deities she believed resided there. Sujata often prayed to these deities and now wished to thank them for helping her give birth to a healthy child. As she entered the forest, she saw Samanera Siddhartha sitting there. His body was thin and frail, but his face remained serene and radiant. Sujata looked at the ascetic with amazement and thought, I have never seen anyone with such a noble appearance. Perhaps he is the king of the forest deities. She then offered the special meal she had prepared to him. Samanera Siddhartha slowly opened his eyes and saw the bowl of food before him. He smiled quietly at Sujata, lifted the bowl to his mouth, and began to drink the milk. Sujata was astonished to see the ascetic's health visibly improve after drinking the milk. After finishing, he placed the bowl down, thanked Sujata, and said, You thought I was a deity, but I am merely an ascetic seeking the truth. Thanks to your offering, I feel rejuvenated. I am now confident that I will find the path to liberation. You will gain much merit for the good deed you have done today. Thank you. The 5 companions who had been practicing asceticism with Siddhartha in the forest saw him accept Sujata's special food offering. They were displeased and said to each other, Samanera Siddhartha has abandoned his quest for enlightenment. He no longer pursues the holy life. Look, he is bathing and eating rich food again. How can we continue to associate with such a person? Let us leave this forest and go to Benares. We can continue our path of asceticism in the deer park near there. They departed, believing that Siddhartha was no longer interested in seeking the truth. However, Siddhartha, having regained his strength through proper nourishment, prepared himself for meditation to attain the liberation he had been seeking for many years. He stood up, crossed the river, and headed towards the place that would later become known as the Bodhi tree, Tree of Enlightenment. 17. The Great Battle, the moment that the world had been waiting for, was now approaching. The ascetic Siddhartha, who had left his kingdom to seek the truth, made his way towards the Bodhi tree. On his way, he met a man carrying fresh grass and asked him for a small bundle, which he used to make a seat. As the ascetic approached the Bodhi tree, the sky became clear, and the world seemed to hold its breath, anxiously awaiting the monumental event that was about to unfold. The tree branches bent down as if welcoming him to sit beneath the Tree of Enlightenment. The ascetic Siddhartha carefully arranged the grass into a small cushion and sat on it, facing east. He assumed a firm lotus position, with his hands resting on his knees. Then, with courageous determination, he made a solemn vow. I will not rise from this place until I have attained full enlightenment, even if I must die in the process. The heavenly beings above rejoiced and bore witness to Siddhartha's profound vow. It was the full moon day of the 4th lunar month, just before sunrise. However, ancient scriptures recount that not everyone was joyous at that moment. There was a force called Mara, the Lord of Illusions, who was filled with fear and anger. Mara, representing the forces of evil and temptation, often disturbed and distracted the minds of humans with negative traits like greed, anger, ignorance, jealousy, doubt, and other harmful tendencies that bring suffering and unrest. Seeing the ascetic Siddhartha meditating under the Bodhi tree, Mara was enraged. He called upon his sons and daughters, shouting, Look there, Prince Siddhartha is meditating. If he succeeds in finding the truth that ends all suffering, what will become of us? Do you not realize that we will lose all our power? We must stop his meditation, or we will be destroyed. Mara and his forces of evil attempted every possible way to disturb Siddhartha's meditation. They created a fierce storm with violent lightning and thunder that surrounded him. They unleashed a whirlwind that seemed to tear the surroundings apart. But under the branches of the Bodhi tree, everything remained peaceful, protected by the power of Siddhartha's meditation. Seeing that the storm had no effect, Mara called back his troops and screamed, "Attack!" Immediately, the forces of demons, monsters, and horrific visions charged towards Siddhartha, shouting, cursing, and hurling insults at him. They shot arrows of hatred, but as the arrows approached Siddhartha, they transformed into harmless lotus petals and fell at his feet. Nothing could disturb the tranquility of his meditation. Mara then thought, if weapons and terrifying visions cannot disrupt Siddhartha, perhaps beautiful and seductive images will. He transformed the fearsome demons into the most enchanting and alluring women. These mesmerizing dancers performed in front of the meditating ascetic, but they too failed to distract him. Memories of palace pleasures, images of his wife and son, heavenly music, and gourmet food, none of these could break the deep concentration of the man determined to find the truth. Mara was defeated, but he made one last attempt. Dismissing his followers, Mara confronted Siddhartha alone. With a mocking tone, he said, "So you are the great Prince Siddhartha. You think you are supreme meditator. Many holy men have failed in their quest for the truth. Do you believe you will succeed? You are truly foolish. Do you not see how much effort it takes to achieve the goal you seek? You spent 29 years indulging in luxury, then 6 years torturing your body, and now you think you can attain enlightenment by sitting here in meditation. Ridiculous. Stop this madness, or at least tell me who can testify that you will succeed where others have failed." These scornful words did not unsettle Siddhartha. From his knee, he silently raised his right hand, brought it forward, and touched the ground in front of Mara. Yes, the earth itself was Siddhartha's witness. Through countless lifetimes, he had appeared on this earth in various forms. He had practiced generosity, patience, and compassion, never harming any living being, and he had meditated to seek the truth. He had fulfilled these virtues as a male, sometimes as a female, as a rich person, and as a poor person, undergoing the cycle of birth and death many times. He had accumulated all these merits with the vow to find the path to end suffering for all beings. The earth was his witness. Seeing this, Mara realized that he was utterly defeated and vanished like a nightmare. Only Siddhartha remained, seated in serene meditation. The storm clouds cleared and the moonlight illuminated the sky. The air became gentle and the morning dew sparkled on the grass. Everything seemed ready. 18. Enlightenment. The ascetic Siddhartha felt his mind becoming light and tranquil. Gradually, he meditated deeply into his own nature, and his wisdom grew ever clearer. With the eye of enlightenment, he saw all events of the past. He discovered that when this life ends, a new one begins. Death is merely the destruction of the physical body. The stream of life continues to flow, taking rebirth in a new form, perpetually cycling through samsara. He realized that those who commit evil deeds in this life, such as harming others, will suffer the consequences in future lives. Conversely, those who show compassion towards others will reap the rewards of happiness and peace. Every action a person performs will never be lost. It will generate results of either happiness or suffering for them in future lives. He also discovered that all beings' lives are interdependent and interconnected. His mind penetrated the profound and mysterious truth. The sun, the planets, the stars, and the galaxies of the universe, all these Siddhartha observed clearly during his meditation. He understood that objects from the tiniest speck of dust to the largest star are related to one another. Everything is in a state of constant flux, arising and ceasing, and then arising again. Nothing happens without a cause, and all causes produce effects. He then realized that the world is filled with suffering. He saw that all beings, from the smallest insect to the mightiest king, chase after sensual pleasures but ultimately only find suffering. And he discovered the cause of all suffering. He understood that people do not see the impermanent nature of all things. They do not see this truth. Out of delusion, people compete, steal, and kill to obtain possessions they crave, yet these possessions never bring lasting happiness. they will inevitably change or deteriorate, and people will start the cycle of seeking new possessions again. He also saw that people often resist what they dislike. Their lives are filled with aversion and hatred. They constantly think of harming others, and as a result, they suffer. From one life to the next, people create their own misfortune. They seek peace but only encounter suffering. Finally, he found the path leading to the end of suffering. If anyone could clearly see the truth as he did that night, their pursuit of desires and subsequent suffering would end. Their minds would be free of greed and anger. They would not harm others in any way. Consequently, they would feel immense happiness. By eradicating all hatred, their hearts would overflow with love, bringing incomparable peace and joy. When the ascetic Siddhartha comprehended all these truths, his mind was entirely free from the taint of ignorance. He attained the supreme light of wisdom. He was no longer an ordinary person, but one who had fully realized enlightenment. He was now a Buddha, the awakened one. He had achieved his goal. With a serene and blissful smile, he arose from his meditation. It was dawn and the sun was just beginning to rise in the east. 19 Whom to teach, all beings rejoiced on that glorious morning. Flowers bloomed everywhere, spreading their fragrant scent through the air. Birds chirped joyfully, and all creatures felt no fear. Rainbows and radiant clouds appeared in the sky, and everyone marveled at these miraculous phenomena. The Buddha was filled with the bliss of liberation. His mind was completely free from ignorance and defilements, and he felt an unending joy. For many days and weeks, he sat near the Bodhi tree, the tree of enlightenment, reflecting on the profound joy and bliss he had attained. Then he thought, I have gone through great trials and practices to find the path that ends suffering and become a Buddha. I have practiced severe austerities for many years. Seeing that most people are deluded and shrouded in ignorance, I am unsure who will understand the teachings I have realized. How can I teach these profound truths to them? Perhaps it would be better for me to remain secluded in the forest for the rest of my life, enjoying the peace of being a Buddha. But then he heard an inner voice. Please do not forget us. We are the beings in the world who are suffering. We have been waiting for this moment since you were born, and even before that time. We have hoped and prayed for many years that you would renounce your princely life to seek the path that would save all beings from suffering. Now that you have realized this teaching, please share it with us. Unlike you, we are still in pain. But another thought arose in the Buddha's mind. Who will be able to practice the teachings I impart? Who has the strength and courage? Who will make the effort and endure? Then the hidden voice spoke again. Venerable One, indeed our minds are veiled in ignorance, but there are still those who are not entirely deluded. They can understand and practice your teachings. For the sake of saving all beings, please kindly share the true Dharma with us. The Buddha smiled and said, of course, I will teach. The only reason I renounced my princely life was to find the path that saves humanity from suffering. Now that I have become a Buddha, I will do whatever I can. But even a Buddha cannot remove all suffering for others if they do not strive to save themselves. People must be willing to prevent illness before a doctor can heal them. Likewise, they must be willing to listen to the true teachings before others can help them. But anyone who comes to me with an open mind will find that I am always ready to teach them in any way I can. Then the Buddha thought, who in this world should I teach first? Who is most ready? He remembered Alara Kalama and Udaka Ramaputta, the two teachers he had met 6 years ago. They are the ones I should teach first, but I know that they have passed away and are no longer in this world. The Buddha then remembered the 5 ascetics who had practiced austerities with him in the forest. He thought, they are ready and can understand the truth. I will teach them first. He knew he would find these friends at the deer park near the city of Varanasi, a most sacred place in ancient India. The Buddha thought, I will go there and begin the teaching work I have decided to do. 20. The first teaching. The journey to the city of Varanasi was quite long, and the Buddha walked slowly through villages and fields. Everyone noticed him. His presence was dignified and graceful, with a serene and noble bearing. At first sight of the Buddha, people felt peace and happiness. He spoke gently and kindly to everyone he met. Regardless of whether they were rich or poor, intelligent or ignorant, noble or humble, the Buddha treated them all equally with respect and boundless compassion. Finally, the Buddha arrived at the deer park. From a distance, his 5 former companions saw him approaching. They whispered to each other, "Look, here comes that useless SIDDHARTHA. We need not bother welcoming him, this weakling. Let us ignore him." But as the Buddha drew closer, they all noticed the extraordinary qualities in his demeanor. Initially reluctant, they found themselves automatically rising to greet him. With deep respect, they prepared a seat for him, arranged his robe, brought water for him, and said, "Welcome, SIDDHARTHA, to the deer park. We are honored to have you join us here." The Buddha responded, "Monks, I appreciate your heartfelt welcome. However, you should know that I am no longer the Prince SIDDHARTHA, so it is not appropriate to call me by that name." The monks asked, "Then what should we call you?" The Buddha replied, "The whole world is shrouded in ignorance. Now, when a person has discovered the truth, they no longer live in delusion. I have become enlightened and found the truth. All enlightened beings are called Buddhas." With deep reverence, the 5 monks said, "Venerable Buddha, please teach us what you have understood, so that we too may become enlightened like you." In response to their request, the Buddha delivered his first sermon. It is known as the turning of the wheel of Dharma, and Dharma refers to the truth he had realized. He began his teaching, "Monks, you should know that there are 4 noble truths. The first is the noble truth of suffering. Life is full of suffering, such as aging, sickness, death, and unhappiness. People are always chasing after pleasures, but ultimately, they only find suffering. Even when they achieve happiness, they quickly become weary of it. There is no place where people find true satisfaction or complete peace. The second is the noble truth of the cause of suffering. When our minds are filled with greed and desires, we encounter suffering. For instance, a wealthy person who hoards their wealth suffers from their stinginess. The third is the noble truth of the end of suffering. When our minds eradicate greed and desires, suffering ceases. We will feel an indescribable peace and happiness. Finally, the fourth is the noble truth of the path to the end of suffering. This is the path that leads to the cessation of all suffering. If we refrain from harming all living beings, if we cultivate and transform our minds, and if we attain wisdom, each of us can achieve complete peace and end all suffering." Upon hearing this sermon, the 5 monks felt as if they had discovered a great treasure. They all said, "Venerable Buddha, you have truly realized the truth. Please teach us the path to ultimate wisdom and complete peace. We vow to be your disciples." It is said that at that moment, many deities also heard this first sermon and descended to the human realm, proclaiming, "The Buddha has begun turning the wheel of Dharma. May all beings in the world attain happiness and peace." 21. The suffering of a mother. The Buddha used many methods to teach. For the common folk and children, he taught by telling them moral stories. For those who were more intelligent, he explained the teachings in detail. And for some, he taught through silence without uttering a word. However, perhaps the most powerful teaching was his own exemplary life and virtuous actions. The Buddha always acted with generosity and compassion. He patiently taught all beings, even those who were ignorant and insane. Before long, many people admired and followed the Buddha, becoming his disciples. Whenever laymen or laywomen faced difficulties and sorrows, they would come to the Buddha for guidance. One day, a woman named GAUTAMA, whose child had just died, was so grief-stricken that she became deranged. She wandered everywhere seeking a teacher who could bring her child back to life. Her friends, feeling sorry for her, said, "GAUTAMA, you should seek the Buddha. Perhaps he can help you." GAUTAMA, clutching her dead child to her chest, came before the Buddha, weeping and pleading, "Please, Lord, help my son to live again." In a gentle voice, the Buddha replied, "GAUTAMA, I can help you, but first you must bring me a mustard seed from a household that has never experienced death." GAUTAMA hurried off to find the mustard seed. She went to one house and was told by the woman there, "You can have a mustard seed and anything else you need, but you should know that my husband died last year." GAUTAMA said, "Oh, in that case I'll go elsewhere." She moved on to the next house, but at every house she visited, she received the same response. Everyone wanted to help Gautami, but every family she spoke to had experienced death. One person said, "My daughter died 3 years ago." Another said, "My brother just died yesterday." Every house told the same story. At the end of the day, she returned to the Buddha. He asked, "Gautami, did you find the mustard seed? And where is your son? You are not carrying him anymore." She replied, "Lord, today I realize that not only my family has experienced death. Everywhere people die. I now see how foolish I was to think that I could have my child back. I have accepted his death and buried him this afternoon. Now I return to you, ready to learn the Dharma. I am ready to listen." The Buddha said, "Gautami, today you have learned much. Sooner or later death comes to everyone, but if you understand the truth, you can live and die in peace. Come, I will teach you." Then he taught her the Dharma, and soon she found a peace and happiness she had never known before. 22. The Rude Man. One day the Buddha was passing through a village. A young man, angry and rude, approached and began to insult him. He shouted, "You have no right to teach others. You are as ignorant as anyone else. You are nothing but a fake." The Buddha did not feel upset or angry upon hearing these words of insult. He calmly asked the young man, "Let me ask you something. If you buy a gift for someone and that person does not accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The rude man was surprised by such a strange question and replied, "The gift would belong to me because I bought it." The Buddha smiled and said, "Exactly so. The insults you have hurled at me are like that gift. If I do not accept them, they return to you. You are the one who will be unfortunate, not me. All your evil actions will harm you. If you want to stop hurting yourself, you must rid yourself of anger and expand your heart with love. When you hate others, it is you who suffers. But when you love others, everyone is happy." The young man listened attentively to the Buddha's wise words. He then said, "Lord Buddha, you are right. Please teach me the doctrine of compassion. I wish to become your disciple." And the Buddha replied, "Of course, I will teach anyone who sincerely wants to learn. Come with me." 23 Words of praise. Before long, the Buddha had many followers and disciples who traveled with him from place to place. One day a disciple approached him and said, "Lord Buddha, you truly are one of the greatest teachers the world has ever seen." The Buddha did not feel pleased by this flattery. Instead, he asked the disciple, "Have you met all the great teachers who have appeared in the world?" The disciple replied, "No, Lord." "And do you know all the great teachers who are currently living and those who will be born in the future?" The disciple answered, "No, I do not." The Buddha taught, "Then it is foolish to claim that I am the greatest teacher of all, for how can you know whether this is true or false?" The disciple responded, "Lord, I simply wanted to praise you because your teachings are so profound and beneficial." The Buddha continued, "If you find my teachings beneficial, the best way to praise me is to practice them. Do not waste your time praising me. My sole purpose in being here is to teach and help all beings. If you want to please me, follow my teachings. This will make me far happier than any words of praise." Another time the Buddha asked a disciple, "When you buy a piece of jewelry, do you pay for it without examining it first?" The disciple replied, "Of course not, Lord. It could be fake, and then I would lose my money." The Buddha continued, "My teachings are like that. Do not believe what I say simply because I have said it. Instead, practice my teachings to see for yourself whether they are true and beneficial. If you find that my teachings align with the truth and are helpful, then follow them. But do not practice them just because you respect me. Also, do not criticize the teachings of other religions and claim they are not good. There are many great teachers in the world, and all of them help humanity according to their own guidance. Do not disparage any religion, for that is not your task. Your duty is to live happily and help others to be happy as well." In this way, the Buddha taught his disciples to reflect, examine themselves, live virtuously, and respect everyone. 24 Love for animals. In those times in India, people often sacrificed animals to the gods. They believed that such sacrifices would please the gods, who would then grant them whatever they prayed for, such as wealth or rain for their crops. Wherever the Buddha went, he taught the people that it was wrong to kill animals for sacrifices. Some people who heard the Buddha's teachings became angry and said, "Our scriptures teach that it is right to sacrifice animals to the gods. "How dare you say otherwise?" The Buddha replied, "It is wrong to cause suffering to others for your own happiness. All living beings desire life just as you do. So, if you kill animals, you are being selfish. And I have taught many times that those who live selfishly will suffer in their lives. Furthermore, any God who demands the blood of other living beings before granting you favors is not a truly good God. Such a God does not deserve your worship. But if you show love and kindness to all living beings, animals as well as humans, then even the gods will honor you." Many people who heard these wise words from the Buddha realized that they were true. They immediately stopped the practice of sacrificing animals, thereby ending a great deal of suffering. 25. The power of compassion. The Buddha had not forgotten his promise to King Bimbisara to return and teach him the Dharma. When the time was right, he returned to Rajagaha. Just outside the city was a hill called Vulture's Peak, and the Buddha and his disciples went to meditate in the caves there. King Bimbisara often climbed the hill to hear the Buddha teach. The people of the city also came, and soon many followers gathered around the Buddha. After some time, the king and other wealthy patrons donated parks and other places where the Buddha and his disciples could stay comfortably and teach the Dharma. Devadatta, a cousin of the Buddha, became jealous. He thought to himself, "The Buddha has many followers and is highly respected, but no one knows about me, even though I am just as great as the Buddha. I must destroy him." Devadatta knew he needed help to kill the Buddha, so he approached the prince, the son of King Bimbisara. He said, "Don't you want to be king? How did your father gain all his wealth and power? Follow me, and if you help me kill the Buddha, I will help you kill your father. Then you can take his place as king." The prince agreed to this wicked plan. Together they tried various ways to kill the Buddha. One day, while the Buddha was meditating near the top of Vulture's Peak, they pushed a large rock down the hill toward him. But just before it was about to crush the Buddha, the rock split into two and did not harm him. On another occasion, the Buddha was walking for alms in Rajagaha with his close disciples. The two enemies knew the Buddha was approaching, so they prepared a dangerous trap. They bought a large elephant and gave it a lot of alcohol to drink. When the elephant was completely drunk, they beat it with sticks until it became enraged and uncontrollable. Then they released the elephant to charge at the Buddha, hoping it would trample him to death. When the disciples saw the mad elephant charging toward them, they were terrified and ran away. All except Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, who stayed by his teacher's side and clung to his robe. As the Buddha saw the elephant coming closer, instead of feeling fear or anger, he radiated boundless compassion for the suffering animal. Even though the elephant was drunk and furious, it sensed the Buddha's powerful aura of loving kindness. It stopped its rampage, approached the Buddha gently, and lowered its massive head at his feet. The Buddha calmly patted the elephant and turned to Ananda, saying, "Only loving kindness can conquer hatred. Hatred never ceases by hatred. This is a law eternal." 26. Returning home. One day, the Buddha told his disciples, "It is time for me to return to Kapilavastu, the capital of my father." All the disciples began the long journey to the Buddha's childhood home. The news of his return spread quickly, and everyone in the city was excited and overjoyed. They said to each other, "Our beloved prince is coming back. Now he is a great teacher with thousands of followers. How wonderful it will be to see him again." King SIDDHARTHA was overjoyed when he heard the news of his son's return. The king knew that the Buddha had many followers, and he thought to himself, "My son has become a great teacher. The prince has brought great honor to me." The king could not wait for the Buddha to arrive, so he sent a courtier on horseback to see how the prince was doing after so many years apart. The next day, the courtier reached the place where the Buddha and his disciples were staying. He saw them with their wooden alms bowls, going from house to house in the village, begging for food. Then the monks returned to their resting place to eat in silence. The courtier returned to Kapilavastu and reported everything to the king. King SIDDHARTHA was furious. He shouted, "My son, a prince, has become a beggar. I feel humiliated. I must put an end to this immediately." The king rode out from the palace to where the prince was staying. When he saw SIDDHARTHA, now a shining Buddha surrounded by thousands of disciples, he was deeply moved. They greeted each other warmly and joyfully. Then the king asked the prince, "I hear that every morning you carry a bowl and beg for food. Is that true?" The Buddha replied, "Yes, it is true. Begging for alms is our tradition." Hearing this, the king became even angrier. He shouted, "Our tradition? You come from a line of kings who have never begged for anything to live. Our custom is to eat food served on gold and silver plates, not from simple wooden bowls. What do you mean by our tradition?" The Buddha gently replied, "Father, you come from a line of kings. That is true, but I come from a line of great teachers, the Buddhas of the past. These venerable teachers were very humble. They accepted food from anyone they met. When I say our tradition is to beg for alms, I mean it is the tradition of the Buddhas." Then the Buddha took his father's hand and walked with him for a long time. He taught the king about the Four Noble Truths and the path to the end of suffering. After listening to the Buddha for a long time, King Suddhodana said, "Indeed, today you are far nobler than the prince who was once my son. As the sage Asita predicted when you were a baby, you have become a great teacher. I bow to you, a Buddha. Please accept me, the one who once wanted you to become a king, as one of your disciples." Soon after, the Buddha's wife Yasodhara, his son Rahula, his foster mother Mahapajapati Gautami, and many other noble women in the palace also requested to become disciples of the Buddha. They said to him, "We were deeply saddened when you left the palace on your horse to become a monk all those years ago. But now, you have brought us immense joy with your teachings and the peace of mind they bring. We are so happy that you left us back then to return now as a Buddha." 27. The King in the Tree Spirit. When the Buddha was 35 years old, he began teaching those who were willing to listen. For the remaining 45 years of his life, he traveled across India, spreading his teachings to bring peace and enlightenment to people. Occasionally, to teach people about love and generosity, the Buddha would tell stories to capture their attention. Here's one of those stories. Long ago, there was a proud king who wanted to build a grand palace for himself. He ordered his ministers, "Go into the forest and find the tallest tree there. I will use it to construct my palace." The ministers went into the forest and found such a tree. It was a giant tree surrounded by many smaller trees. That night, they reported back to the king saying, "Your Majesty, we have found the tree you wanted. Tomorrow morning we will return to the forest to cut it down." The king was very pleased and went to sleep. That night, he had a strange dream. In his dream, the spirit of the tree appeared before him and said, "Your Majesty, please do not destroy my home. If you cut down this tree, every chop of the axe will cause me great pain, and I will die." But the king replied, "You are the most beautiful tree in this forest. I need this tree to build my palace." The tree spirit pleaded, but the king remained stubborn and insisted on cutting the tree down. Finally, the tree spirit said to the king, "Very well, you may cut down the tree, but please do it this way. Do not cut it from the base as people usually do. Instead, have your men climb to the top of the tree and cut it down piece by piece. First, they should cut off a section, then another section, and continue until the entire tree is cut down." The king was surprised by this request and said, "But if I order my men to do as you suggest and cut the tree into many pieces, it will cause you much more pain than cutting it down in one go from the base." The tree spirit replied, "Yes, that is true. But if you follow my suggestion, it will be safer for the other creatures in this forest. You see, my tree is very large. If it falls, it will crush many of the smaller trees and kill countless small creatures around it. The nests of birds and insects will be destroyed, and many smaller trees will be obliterated. If you cut the tree into short sections, it will cause less harm." Hearing this, the king was enlightened. He thought, "The tree spirit is willing to endure hundreds of cuts to spare the small creatures in the forest from suffering. The tree spirit is so selfless and compassionate. Here I am, being selfish and wanting to cut down the tree for my own pleasure and pride. Instead of cutting it down, I should honor the tree spirit. This dream teaches me to be compassionate and to treat everyone with kindness." The next day, the king went into the forest to adorn the tree spirit with offerings. From that day on, he became a kind and just ruler. 28. Universal compassion. One day, Devadatta fell seriously ill. Many doctors came to examine him, but none could cure his ailment. Then, the Buddha, who was Devadatta's relative, came to visit him. One of the Buddha's disciples asked, "Venerable Sir, why do you want to help Devadatta? He has repeatedly plotted to harm you and even tried to kill you." The Buddha replied, "There is no reason to treat some people well and others with hatred. Everyone is equal because all beings desire happiness and dislike illness and suffering. Therefore, we should love everyone." Then the Buddha approached Devadatta's bed and said, "If I truly love Devadatta, who has always wanted to harm me, just as I love Rahula, my only son, then may my relative be healed." Instantly, Devadatta was cured and regained his health. The Buddha then turned to his disciples and taught, "You should remember that Buddhas always help all sentient beings equally." This story illustrates the Buddha's boundless compassion and his ability to see beyond personal grievances, treating every being with kindness and love. 29 The final days. At the age of 80, the Buddha reflected, "I have done everything I could to guide people toward enlightenment and to teach them to live with love and without fear. Now it is time for me to show them how to leave this world without anxiety or sorrow." The Buddha then called his trusted disciple, Ananda, and said, "Ananda, it is time for us to return to Kapilavastu one last time. I wish to pass away in the city where I was born and raised." Ananda was deeply saddened and began to weep. "Venerable Sir, please do not leave us. You have been our guide for so many years. Without you, we will be lost," he cried. The Buddha comforted him, saying, "Ananda, do not cry. I have always taught that death is a natural part of life. There is nothing to fear. You must understand this. When I am no longer here, let my teachings be your guide. If you truly understand my teachings, you will not need me. Come, let us go." The Buddha and his disciples began their journey northward. When they reached a place not far from Kapilavastu, they came to the village of Kusinara. The Buddha asked his disciples to stop there to rest. He then turned to Ananda and said, "This is the place where I will pass away." Although it was the last day of the Buddha's life, he continued to help others. An old man from the village came to see him, and the Buddha welcomed him. He listened to the man's sorrows and comforted him with gentle words. The old man's heart felt peaceful and happy again. Then the Buddha went into a grove and lay down between two trees. His disciples gathered around him. Some wept, but others maintained a peaceful composure, silently watching over him. The Buddha gave his final instructions to his disciples. "Remember the teachings I have given you. Greed and desire are the roots of all suffering. Life is constantly changing, so do not become attached to anything in this world. Strive to cultivate your mind and body to find true and lasting happiness." Then the Buddha turned to face the east, placed his right hand under his head, and closed his eyes. He passed away peacefully into nirvana on the full moon day of the month of Vesak. After a period of mourning, the disciples placed the Buddha's body on a large funeral pyre. According to tradition, they prepared to cremate him, but they could not light the fire. They had to wait for the Buddha's great disciple Mahakāssyapa, who was far away when the Buddha passed. As soon as Mahakāssyapa arrived and paid his final respects, the pyre spontaneously ignited. The Buddha's body was cremated, leaving behind only relics, sarira. The kings of northern India who had heard of the Buddha's passing all desired to keep his relics. They thought, "I will build a great stupa in my kingdom to honor this great teacher and enshrine his relics. This will bring great pride to my kingdom." However, each king wanted the relics for himself, leading to arguments and disputes. One king said, "These relics belong to me." Another countered, "No, they are mine." Finally, a wise man intervened and said, "The Buddha spent his life teaching us to love one another. Now, after his passing, you are foolishly preparing to fight over his relics. Fighting contradicts the Buddha's teachings of compassion. We should divide the relics equally so that each of you can build a stupa in your own kingdom." The king saw the wisdom in these words and ended their quarrel. They divided the Buddha's relics equally and returned to their respective kingdoms. They built stupas to enshrine the relics, honoring the Buddha who had taught and lived the path of peace and wisdom. 30. The enduring teachings. The Buddha passed away over 2,500 years ago in a small village in India, but his teachings of love and wisdom have never been lost. The disciples who lived with the Buddha spread his teachings to many others, and those Buddhists continued to pass the Dharma to future generations. In this way, the Buddha's teachings have been preserved and continue to be shared with humanity today. People in every country, regardless of gender or religious belief, can study and practice the Buddha's compassionate teachings. By sincerely following his guidance, we can eliminate selfishness, anger, and greed. We can overcome all anxieties and attain the inner peace and understanding that Prince Siddhartha discovered under the Bodhi tree, tree of enlightenment. Just as the Buddha achieved enlightenment, each of us can also become a Buddha, an enlightened one. We too can bring happiness to others, just as the Buddha did. May all beings be well and happy. Do not commit any evil deeds. Practice all that is good. Purify your mind. This is the teaching of all Buddhas. The life and teachings of the Buddha offer profound lessons for us to live by. His journey from a prince to an enlightened teacher shows that spiritual awakening and the quest for truth are accessible to everyone. The stories and parables shared in this account demonstrate how the Buddha's wisdom and compassion touched countless lives and continue to inspire millions around the world. By embracing the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, we can cultivate kindness, compassion, and understanding in our own lives. This path not only brings personal peace and happiness, but also contributes to the well-being of those around us. The Buddha's legacy endures because his teachings address the fundamental human condition and offer practical solutions for overcoming suffering. By following the Noble Eightfold Path and understanding the Four Noble Truths, we can transform our lives and realize our true potential. The Buddha's message is timeless, transcending cultural and historical boundaries. It reminds us that enlightenment is within our reach, and that through mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom, we can achieve a state of lasting peace and happiness. As we reflect on the Buddha's life and teachings, let us commit to practicing compassion, mindfulness, and wisdom in our daily lives. By doing so, we honor the Buddha's legacy and contribute to a more peaceful and harmonious world for all beings. May the Buddha's teachings continue to light our path and guide us toward enlightenment. Let us strive to embody the qualities of compassion, wisdom, and peace in all our actions. May we all find the inner strength to overcome our challenges and the clarity to see the truth in every moment. Thank you for listening. If you found this video helpful, please share it with those who might benefit from it. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button, follow, and turn on the notification bell. This is how you can show your support for me. Once again, thank you very much, and see you in the next videos.